言語を考えずに話せる状態まで持っていくのが好きって言ってましたけど、そのプロセスについてもう少し詳しく話してもらえますか？これは考え方を少し変えるだけなんです。文の型として捉えるようになると、そこからは結構シンプルになります。ここで言う型は文章のパターンのことですね。つまり、いろんなタイプの文を集めて、その構造を意識しながら何度も繰り返す、無意識で言えるくらいまで練習すれば、呼吸みたいに自然に出てくるようになります。最初は、かなり難しいですし、そこはごまかしたくないですね。でも、続けていくと、本当に母国語みたいな感覚で、話せるようになってきます。それと同時に、何千語もの単語を覚えていく中で、必要な時に入れ替えられる言葉もどんどん増えていきますね。この辺はいつか長めの動画で詳しく話そうかなと思ってます。But actually, let's just do it now. So, disclaimers really quick before we get into this. Number one, this is very difficult, but it's extremely effective. Number two, this works for any language, no matter where you are, assuming that your language is on YouTube. You know, all you really need to do this is YouTube and some open documents to work with. Lastly, you will have to overcome your perfectionism issues to see results, especially people who are obsessed with accents. Okay, one of my biggest realizations with learning languages is that sentences are frameworks, which include many frameworks as well. And your goal is to download as many frameworks as possible into your mind to the point where you can kind of say them without thinking that much. And then along with that, you want to take those sentences and make variations of it in your own life and your own goals and your own subjects that your life revolves around, and practice those until you can kind of say it without thinking about it. And how I like to see this is like having an array of light bulbs, right? Say you have a room and there's a bunch of little light bulbs all around the room. I'm not going to put up stock footage. You can just pretend I have something up here. And every light bulb is a sentence. And then you have primary lights and secondary lights, where primary lights are like a main sentence structure, and secondary lights are just different vocabulary words, maybe different nuances in those sentences. And every time you want to convey a thought, or every time you want to answer a question or anything, your brain is just going to pick two lights or three lights or however many it needs, and it's going to turn those on and say whatever you have to say. You know, most people know that sentences are important, but the most important aspect is to know that you have to alter them based on things relevant to your life. Not only is this going to add some sort of interest to the sentences that you learn, but it's going to help you use that in different scenarios. So to give a quick example of what I'm talking about, say you take a sentence like, どんな仕事も楽しめるようにするのが一番なので、その面白さややりがいを見つけることも大事だと思います。And so I would take that framework and then I would apply it to something related to guitar. So I could say, ギターの練習を楽しめるようにするのが一番なので、自分が好きな曲を弾くことも大事だと思います。And the framework is, of course, A is the best thing to try to do, so B is also important. Finding B or doing B. And those are the parts that you can interchange with whatever dialogue you have. And so in this example, I would say, of course, it's best to enjoy guitar practice. So finding songs you like to play is also important. And then you can talk about food, you can talk about school, travel, whatever you want. But the point is to identify the frameworks in that sentence and then start to make different variations of it. And so another example could be something like, ゲームにおける死を途中で変える。まあ極力避けるべきことではありますが、柔軟にすべきことでもあります。And so I would take that and I could apply it to something like MMA this time. And I could say, 試合中に戦い方を途中で変える。まあ極力避けるべきことではありますが、相手に応じて柔軟にすべきことでもあります。I added a little bit. 相手に応じて is like depending on your opponent, because if you just went into the next part, it wouldn't make sense. But that's what I mean. And those little add-ons like that example are things that are just going to happen as you practice this more. Both of these sentences are ones I stole from Sakurai, by the way, the creator of Super Smash Brothers. He has a channel where he just talks a lot about business and game development and mindset and all that. And I just memorized a lot of his videos a long time ago, and other people as well on the more business side of things. So this is why I can produce sentences like that. But this is a long-term goal. It doesn't have to be advanced sentences like this. It can just be something really basic. I want to go to the store. I want to go eat food. I want to subscribe to Vaughn's YouTube channel, which you should, or I will send this to come get you. But you can have any type of sentence that you want and just edit it in accordance with your own life. And again, that's going to do is not only is it going to add an interest factor, but it's really going to get that pattern or that framework ingrained into your brain. And this is a really great way to build like lasting confidence in the language, because when you take these sentences and you edit it to something that's relevant in your own life, it's going to give you so much confidence in talking about the things that you actually like to do. And again, that's going to stack on itself over time. So really take advantage of that. I know most people know that learning sentences is important, but that next step of taking that and editing it to a relevant subject in your own life, I cannot explain how beneficial that is. So really take advantage of that. Okay, let's talk about grammar really quick. Now, I have talked about only spending a day or so looking at grammar, and this is why. When you learn these sentences, that's when you want to really focus on the grammar. And you want to learn grammar in the context of sentences that you're learning at that time. This is just my recommendation and something that's helped me out a lot. And it's also going to help you do things in real time, because when you're speaking, you don't have time to conjugate. You don't have time to think about causative and te forms and all these other things. You just have to say it. Something that you can do these days that was not available when I learned Japanese is you can just plug a sentence into AI like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, or I think the other one's Bard or something. You can plug it in and just say, explain this grammar to me. And what it's going to do is it's going to break down each word. It's going to give you the definition of each word. And then it's going to break down the grammar, the conjugations and all that. And you can continue to ask it questions based on those sentences that you're plugging in. You can say, explain this more. Why is it this way? Why is it not like this? Really ask it as much questions as you can. And it's going to give you pretty good answers, really good answers, to be honest. Another tip with AI is always tell it you want to sound like a native speaker, because the computer is just going to do its job. So if you tell it to translate something or just, turn this into Japanese or whatever, or reverse, it might give you a robotic translation, but it does know how to sound like a native speaker. I know people don't like to accept that. They don't like to believe it, but it's true. It takes a lot of information from like forums and articles and even Reddit and things like that. And that's where it gets a natural and native type of look at any language. But that's my take on grammar. I think you learn it in context and learn how to use it in real time by just drilling it through, and your brain's gonna kind of pick up the grammar from there. Now, a quick message to overthinkers. You have to know that your brain is like a computer, assuming you don't know the ins and outs of a computer. But what I mean is that you'll never really understand how it works. I still, and I'm not like trying to be funny, I still don't know how I speak Japanese or any other languages. I really don't. I know that I drill the sentences and I try to do many different variations. And then when I go speak, or like when I used to be at work in Japan, I would try to speak and things would just happen and things would come out. And even in places where I've never been, different countries where I've never been, I would speak to those native speakers and these sentences would come out and they would be correct, or they would instantly understand me, at least, even if they weren't correct. And I still have not figured out how all that works. And I don't think I ever will. But that's really important, because sometimes you just won't be able to understand why you can produce such sentences, but you just have to accept it. Even the intro of this video, like, I think I can kind of remember what I said, but like my brain at this point is just doing its thing. But again, this is very difficult at the very beginning. So I'm not trying to say it's like breathing right away. Of course, I believe I said that in the intro too, but it takes a lot of work. And after a lot of repetitions and going to sleep and getting up and getting more repetitions and going back to sleep, I'm mentioning sleep because that's when your brain builds these neuron synapses. I think that's what it's called. Basically your ability to produce it faster. Myelin sheath, I think, is the other word. I don't know. I'm not a neurologist. You could tell me in the comments. But every time you go to sleep, it strengthens those repetitions. And the more you do this over the months and days and even years, it's just gonna be like breathing when you say certain things. But I say that to say, overthinkers, you're probably never gonna be satisfied with the unknown, and you just have to get over it. Okay, now where do you find sentences? I think shadowing native content is a great way to start because it gives you confidence that the sentences are pretty much correct, because sometimes native speakers don't speak correct Japanese, but I'm not gonna go there in this video. And if you shadow native content, you'll also pick up these other little nuances along the way. I would definitely start with phrase videos. So find a video that's like 100 Japanese phrases or 100 Russian phrases or whatever you're studying. Those phrases are like 20 verbs and so on. Those really useful things. Learn to shadow the entire video. And I do mean from start to finish. So if it's a 20-minute video, you want to be able to say 0 to 20 minutes eventually. If you have to stay with the same video for 3 weeks straight, that's just something you're gonna have to do. And I know it's annoying, but the more you do this with little videos or like a simple concept, that's gonna transfer over to the next thing. And then as you do that with that video, that's gonna transfer over to the next thing. And you're gonna notice over time, you eventually stop running out of things that you have to continuously look up and search. But again, that's an end goal, not a beginning. It's going to be extremely difficult at the beginning. I wanna keep saying that. The next one is a concept I call time stop, like Dio and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Basically, this is like having a general awareness of what you're watching or what you're listening to. And then whenever you find a sentence that you really like, that's a sentence you wanna just stop on and take it and put it somewhere in your notes. So for example, those sentences earlier that I said, those were the things that I wanted to practice for different situations when I was watching Masahiro Sakurai's videos. And so I would take that sentence, make like 10 different variations of it and just drill it over and over again to the point where I could say them all kind of without thinking. This is going to be an unscheduled thing where maybe you're just out and about your day or whatever. You even could be thinking of a sentence in your head that you don't know how to say. This is another time where you write that sentence down in your native language, figure out how to say it in your target language, and then practice that in different forms over and over again. Another thing I will add is that you want to stick with the same type of sentences until you have it down. So what do I mean? If you're learning if-then statements, if something happens, then something happens. If that's a sentence that you're trying to learn, you want to stick with that for several days until you just have it down. And some languages in particular sound weird compared to English or your native language. And so you will need to stick with those a lot longer. I know in Japanese in particular, reasoning for doing things and like comparisons where you'll use yorimo and things like that, yori hayai, it's like backwards, but not backwards to an English speaker. So that's something for me, for example, that I had to sit with for a couple weeks really, and just drill them over and over again. This is bigger than that. This is faster than this, and so on. But like, take a sentence type and just stick with it until you have it down mostly. Now, don't be a perfectionist with this, but until you have it down somewhat smoothly, just stick with that. And you'll transfer that, again, you'll transfer that over to other things later. Now, here are some mistakes that you should avoid. Be aware of your sources. I know personally, I have, unfortunately, a very elegant style of speaking and then a very almost disrespectful style of speaking. But that's because my life in Japan was either with heavily tattooed people at the MMA gyms, I'm not gonna go there, or at work. And in between, it was like, I was with my American friends, so I was mostly speaking English. My speech kind of gravitates between those two. And I had to work on, and still really, I still have to work on the inner part and work on like the neutral Japanese. So something you should be aware of, and don't overdo this, like don't obsess over this, but something you should be aware of is like what sources you're getting and what kind of speech they're doing, because that will dictate the way you speak. But again, don't obsess over this. I do want to make that clear. Do not obsess over trying to find the right content. Just practice, because no matter what you practice, the fundamentals will overlap. So if you're learning anime exclusively, you're still going to learn a lot of Japanese fundamentals that are going to carry over into real life. Now, In real life, there's going to be some subtle nuances that you're going to have to pick up, but that's totally cool because you're still going to gather a lot of fundamentals. The next one is to pay attention to pitch, but do not obsess over it. You know, one of the languages I used to speak is Mandarin, which is a lot more tonal than Japanese. I think it's pitch and tonal, but I don't know. But like Mandarin, it's very clear when you're saying things wrong. Japanese, you can get away with a lot and people can understand you. So sometimes people don't pay as much attention to it, like myself. I really don't pay attention to it that much. But you do want to have a general awareness of pitch. Now, at no point should pitch obsession stop you from practicing. This is why I say don't obsess over it, because many people get stuck in this bubble where they're so worried about saying things with the perfect pitch or sounding like a native speaker that they never actually learn to get their brain to speak freely. You know, I often met a lot of these people in Japan. I don't like to say this because they're not bad people. They're really good people, honestly. But I do think they're misled in the point where the obsession over accent and sounding perfect and almost this flex in a sense keeps them stuck in sounding like a native speaker in very curated environments. But anything outside of that, they really couldn't express themselves. And like that huge drop off where you're good, you're going, and then boom, you can't do anything. It's not a great place to be. I've been there in different ways, but it's not a good place to be, especially if that high skill level is based off of an unhealthy obsession. That's not something you want to roll with. Another mistake, and this was one I made as well, is on paper skills versus real life skills. Now, the Japanese or language you know in your head is not going to be the language that you can produce in real time if you never did the repetitions. So, you know, I think of it like a bridge, right? You have this side, and then you have a bridge, and then you have the other side. Again, I'm not using stock footage. You could just pretend there's a bridge here. This stuff over here, the knowledge and application and all that, or knowledge and like pitch, and I know the perfect accent and all that. When you try to use it, like this side of things, if you never brought it across the bridge, it's not going to happen. And most people, unfortunately, and this was me too, most people unfortunately think as soon as it's time to use it, that it's just going to cross that bridge and work and everything is going to be great and the sun is going to be shining and so on. But that's not the case. You know, again, I've seen people in some embarrassing situations who assume their level was a lot higher than it was because of this concept. And I've been there too. You know, especially at work, you know, I used to think I knew some things or I could say some things, but I didn't practice it. And when it came time to use it, I was struggling just to get those sentences out. And I want to say that for anyone watching, because like, it's not hard to get it over there. You just have to do the reps. Once you say a sentence 150 times, the 151st time is going to be pretty clean. Did I say first? The 151st time is going to be pretty clean. Anyways, let's talk about vocabulary. Now, people often ask me how much vocabulary should you know? Based on my experience, I think 6,000 to 7,000 is the magic number. I know in the first video I ever did about like the primer to getting fluent in Japanese, I talk about 2,000 to 4,000. I mean, naturally, I assume most people would continue, but if you want an end goal, 10,000 is good, but 6,000 to 7,000 is like the magic number. I find that after 7,000, and I don't have a chart to count all this, by the way, I'm just like kind of making this up based on my experience. But after 7,000, I realize that most of it's like cherry picked vocabulary words. So some things that I may never use or that I rarely use are in that 7,000 to 10,000 range. But anything before that is common, and you will need to know that. If you really want to flex in Japanese, getting up to 15,000 or 20,000 is great, but you're going to need to watch a lot of TED Talks and like scientific things and all that. And if you can't speak the basic Japanese fluently, I would say don't worry about that, because you can dance around a lot of vocabulary words anyways when you have about 6,000 to 7,000. So memorizing vocabulary. Now, I talked about this in a different video about mnemonic associations. This is how I memorize a lot of vocabulary words. And I believe in that video I said chirakasu, which is to scatter around or like mess up or whatever. and I talked about cheetahs in a castle, and the cheetahs are running around making a mess. You probably still remember that if you watched that video. Now, sticking with kasu, goma kasu. Goma kasu is like to mislead or deceive. And I believe I said in the intro, actually, soko wa goma kashita kunai. So goma, sesame seeds, and kasu, castle. What I think of is someone at the top of a castle and they're sprinkling sesame seeds, but the sesame seeds have like deception and doubt and misleading thoughts, you know, sowing seeds of doubt amongst the people inside of the castle. So, you know, it's a silly example, but it works. The next one I would say is like shiban. Shiban means fretboard in Japanese. And so I think of a Shiba, like the dog, named Vaughn, Shiban, and he's playing guitar, because that's what I do. I play guitar. So I think Shiban. And ever since I made that association, I literally never forgot the word. And again, as you do this with every vocabulary word, at least most vocabulary words, because some are more difficult. If you do this with most vocabulary words you get, you're going to remember a lot of vocab. And as you start to practice sentences, it's going to be choppy, but it will smoothen out. And then eventually you won't even need the mnemonic association. You're just going to remember the sentence and the words as they are. I will have a separate video someday about vocab exclusively and how to get to 0 to like 10,000. So stay tuned for that. But I just want to kind of remind everyone about mnemonic associations. Really take advantage of them. And as far as isolation versus in context, I learned vocabulary in isolation, but I understand that most people don't like that. They like to learn vocabulary in context. However, it's actually both if you're using mnemonic associations. So you may find a sentence and you're going to have to isolate that word to make a mnemonic association and then put it back in. But it is cool to learn things in context because you see a natural use for it. However, if you're just trying to stack vocabulary quickly, the way I used to learn languages, I would recommend isolation. But again, you do whatever you want. It's up to you. Your goals will dictate what you do with that. Okay, quickly, let's talk about Romaji, Kana, and Kanji. Now, I continuously receive a lot of feedback about promoting Romaji, bad feedback. And I'm going to continue to promote Romaji. Now, what I'm not saying is read an essay in Romaji. That's not what I'm saying. Romaji is simply a means to get what you're hearing into your head. And so no matter if you're a visual learner or an auditory learner, you need to develop your ear for language. And Kana, though it's quick to learn, it will slow you down. Romaji is just quick. It's less brain power to use, and it's going to get what you're listening to in your head. That's the most important part. But again, do not sit there and read articles in Romaji. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think I ever said anything like that, but if I didn't make that clear, it's clear now. Okay, Kana, absolutely learn it. I would say learn it right away, but do not get fixated on trying to use Kana all day unless you just really like it. Unless you just really like it, go ahead. But it doesn't take that long to learn. So I would say just go ahead and do it. At least have it in your brain and slowly gather the skill set of it over time as you use Romaji. But again, you do whatever you want. Kanji. Now, this is the part where I get attacked in the comments also, but I'm also cool with that. I think kanji is not useful until you're fluent in the language, at least for the sake of this video and like the title that's on this video. You know, most people unfortunately work hard, but they're working hard in the wrong direction. And I want you to know that hard work is not always productive. And for the sake of speaking and really understanding too, kanji, you can study it, you can grind it out, you can learn everything you need to know about kanji, but it's not going to help you speak and understand in real time. I know people like to think it does, but it really doesn't. And I'm not saying you're dumb for learning kanji, right? I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're a hard worker, but you just have to turn over a little bit. Like just turn to the left a little bit and work hard in the right direction, because it's not productive towards this goal of speaking without thinking that much. And some people do use an anecdotal fallacy to say, well, I studied kanji and I speak it, therefore, but it's really not. You studied kanji and you speak it, and those are not really connected. I'm a bit apologetic because I deal with these comments pretty much every week, But please just know, if you're studying kanji and your goal is to speak without really thinking that much, put the kanji away, learn to speak and understand, attack it later. I'm going to talk about why I think kanji is better to approach after you're fluent in another video, so stay tuned for that too. But for now, put the kanji down. Now, here's some closing thoughts and just, little things that I think would help you get towards this goal of speaking without thinking. And number one is to go in the order of your insecurities. So if you have trouble with just basic introductions or self-introductions or just basic small talk, which, I think that's where everyone should start anyways. That's what you should really focus on. And you shouldn't worry about advanced sentences, especially like the sentences I use today. You're probably never going to use those sentences. Focus on the basic relevant things to your life and things that you really need. And then as you build up confidence in that, it's going to help you attack the next thing and the next thing. One of the mistakes people make, especially with very difficult things, is they try to go too far too soon, thinking they're going to save time. But really what you're doing is just crashing out or burning out. Really, crashing out has a different name these days, or a different meaning these days. But you're going to burn out because you're trying to do too much at once. Start small, start with little things. My name is this. What's your name? How old are you? All that. Learn to say those just effortlessly to the point where you're just thinking. And again, those light switches turn on and the sentence comes out. That's the point you want to get to with those. Then you attack more advanced sentences and so on. But go in the order of your insecurities. Typically, those are just basic to advanced, but don't skip over subject related things too. If you like to go to the gym a lot, learn things about the gym. Learn how to talk about the gym. All that. Learn how to talk about video games. Learn how to talk about guitar, jiu-jitsu, MMA, or whatever. Whatever you like to do, learn to talk about that and use that confidence to go into the next thing. Next one is that, again, this is very difficult, but one day you will be able to speak without thinking much. I know it sounds unrealistic. I even have people in my comments telling me, like in my shorts or in these videos, that I'm reading from a teleprompter or something. But I just know these people have not put in the work. If you do put in the work, I promise you, it's just gonna happen. Just like the way you speak your native language. It's the same thing. And people assume difficult sentences are impossible to do that with, but the easier ones are. And it's only because they have a lot of repetitions in the easier ones. You've said hello and how are you and all that millions of times, but you have not said, I would like to know the discrepancies between this and this in the language. That's a useless sentence too, but you know what I'm talking about. You have to take those advanced sentences and get the same amount of repetitions in, and then it's all going to feel the same. And like I said in the last Japanese video I did, or like the original one, I can't remember. The one that has a lot of views. If you made it this far, you can definitely do this. You can speak without thinking. You can find these frameworks and download them into your brain and activate the lights as you need them and speak the language quite freely. You can do this. It's just going to take a lot of work, and again, a lot of stress and repetition, over and over and over again. And eventually it will feel like breathing for the most part. My next Japanese videos will be about understanding Japanese at native speed, and again, that vocabulary speed run video. So if you want, stay tuned for that. Also, occasionally check my shorts tab. I post random videos in Japanese there, or in English too, usually answering questions or just, I like to do uncut, unedited Japanese reels to kind of give a realistic look at speaking. And even the mistakes or like slip ups, I just leave them in and post them. And I want to continue to do that to kind of keep things transparent over here. So look at those whenever you need to. There may or may not be a free PDF pinned in the comments and in the description box. There might be, if I can work on it before posting this, but it'll be up there eventually. But check that. It's free. Download it. It's a summary of this video. That's something I want to do for all my videos, at least all the major ones. And you can just download it and use it whenever you want. That way you don't have to keep coming back to this video and watching it and skipping through and all that. It'll just be there for you to read, and you can print it out, highlight, all that kind of stuff. Anyways, subscribe, or again, I will send this to come and get you. I'm about to go practice more guitar. Love you guys, and see you in the next one. Peace.